Hello, hello, hello. Welcome everybody. Uh, Today I am with Miss Karen Lee Street, the author of the historical mystery crime novel Edgar Allan Poe and the London Monster, recently published in the Turkish language and first in a trilogy, and also works as a standalone book. She's from Australia. She is in Australia now, and which means she lives in the future, eight hours to be exact from us. So, hello Karen, welcome. How are you? And most importantly, who are you? Tell us.
Thank you. Greetings from the future. Well, you start with the hardest question. Who am I? Okay. I'm a British American dual national, and I was born in Philadelphia, where Edgar Allan Poe spent many years writing and living. I spent most of my adult life in London, where Edgar Allan Poe also lived. As a child, he studied in Stoke Newington, and I lived very near there. And now I'm in Australia, as you say, getting used to it. Summer has started here. It's very hot, so I'm fine. My background, I worked in the film industry for many years. I still do as a freelance script editor. I used to work for a pan-European script development agency, helping people improve their scripts. I left that on the publication of my first collection of short stories, which revolved around a crime called Tattoos and Motorcycles. And then I worked on a lot of screenplays, and since in Australia, I've written a book called Writing and Selling Crime Film Screenplays, the kind of how-to manual, looking at different types of crime films, detective, police procedural, all the different subgenres. And then I started the trilogy with Edgar Allan Poe and the London Monster. Edgar Allan Poe and the Jewel of Peru is the second one, and the third one is Edgar Allan Poe and the Empire of the Dead. That's me.
Yep, that's great. I hope the other two and your manual also. It's very interesting. It's very good for us, I guess, for writers. All right, seems very productive you are. So let's talk about the book. And so you always followed trace the steps of the great Allan Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. So it seems so. You were born there. You lived where he was in school, I guess, primary school, something like that.
Yes.
He was very young. And then
Yep.
in your book, you say there's a great quote: "The mind is like a box with compartments that need unlocking." So let's talk about Edgar Allan Poe and the London Monster, the book. Well, the title says it's about Edgar Allan Poe and a monster, obviously. But there's more than that. I know that. So tell us what's more than that.
Okay. The basic premise is, what if you discovered that your grandparents were notorious criminals and that they got away with it? And what if someone else was convicted for their crimes and that person or someone associated with them is out for revenge? So I like revenge stories, so that basic idea appealed to me. So in my book, Edgar Allan Poe receives a box of letters from his foster father's new wife that suggest that his grandparents were a notorious criminal called the London Monster. He's not very happy with this idea because he doesn't want to come from bad blood. So he decides to travel to London, where his grandparents had lived, and meet with his friend C. Auguste Dupin to try to ascertain whether the letters are fake or real. But he desperately wants to prove the letters false. So that's the
Wow,
basic setup.
nice premise. Okay. uh, So where did you get that idea from? It's a great idea.
Thank you. I was actually researching another crime story idea, which has now become part of Edgar Allan Poe and the Jewel of Peru, the second book. And while I was doing historical research, I came across a book called Old Times that was written in 1885. I wanted to read older accounts, original accounts of the times that I was researching, just to get a better feel for what was happening then. And within that book, there was the story of the London Monster. The London Monster terrorized the women of London between 1788 and 1790. And basically, he or she went around slashing the dresses of women. No one was terribly hurt, but it caused great scandal. Women were terrified. There was almost a mass hysteria in London during that time. It might sound like a trivial crime, but then if you damage somebody else's clothing, you could be transported to Australia, or you could be hanged. It was a hanging offense to damage someone else's clothing. So we've all probably heard about people being sent to Australia for stealing a handkerchief, but this was far worse. They were damaging the clothing. The problem is, every woman that reported the crime when they were attacked described the villain differently. So there was no clear picture of what the London Monster looked like, and that probably added to the name of being a monster. He seemed to disappear immediately after the crime and had, sometimes was described as 6 foot tall, sometimes as much shorter. There was nothing consistent. So it struck me as a strange story, and it intrigued me, that whole element of it. So I found another book by Jan Bondesten called The London Monster, which went into great detail. He did incredible research, a nonfiction book on it. And I learned that eventually, in May of 1790, a reward was offered for the London Monster's capture. And it was quite a sizable reward. It was £100, which was a lot of money in that day. Immediately, a woman came forward who had been attacked and said, "I know who it is," because she wanted the reward. So she accused a man called Renwick Williams, who was a very poor Welshman, who was basically a flower seller. And there was a trial, which was farcical. Anything you would expect from a normal trial. People were shouting at him, accusing him. People lied on the stand. And it was so bad, they gave him a retrial. And in the second trial, he had a lawyer who was terrible. So the poor man didn't stand a chance. He was convicted and given 6 years in Newgate prison. Luckily, he wasn't hanged. But I think anyone at the trial probably thought, it's not a clear-cut case. So I could just imagine that as a movie scene, the courtroom drama. It was so over the top. So I thought, okay, what can I do with this story? I really wanted to do something with it. And then I remembered that Edgar Allan Poe's grandparents were actors. And there had been notes in various newspaper accounts that perhaps the London Monster was an actor with a facility for disguise who could, change the way he looked, and that's why no one gave a consistent description. So that's what the basic idea came from.
Okay, it's very interesting story. Okay, and it's a tip for aspiring writers, I guess, to go and search historical stuff to get some ideas. It's fascinating. Yes, very good. Okay, so I understand this the Poe's grandparents connection. Okay, but why make Edgar Allan Poe the main character of the novel and connect him to this story and his grandparents? Can you tell us why Edgar Allan Poe is the main character there?
Good question. I didn't have a eureka moment of, I'm going to write a book about Edgar Allan Poe and Auguste Dupin. It sort of evolved, I think, because he was always around me in Stoke Newington, where I was living, and so on. But I reread a biography of his, a short biography and a collection of his works that stressed his grandparents being actors on the stage. So I thought, I'll look it up, and the time fit perfectly. They were in London performing when the London Monster was at large. And that made me think, oh, well, what if they did it? Because they could disguise themselves. They had that sort of experience. And further to that, his grandfather disappeared from the public record about 1790, and his grandmother emigrated to America just before Renwick Williams was released from prison. So I thought, if she had set him up, maybe she's on the run. So, this is made up. The London Monster those are a true crime, but these little details got me thinking about a story that, maybe that happened. So why Poe? I'd read all of his work since I was a child, and I'm a fan. I'm not an expert, but I'm a fan. So of course he created arguably the first detective in Auguste Dupin. Deductive reasoning, his three stories, Murders in the Rue Morgue, Purloined Letter, The Murder of Marie Roget, which is based on a true crime. It seemed an interesting idea to put the two together. And particularly if Poe, if it were his grandparents who were potential criminals, I felt he would react very emotionally to that. So he needed a very analytical person to investigate with him, to stop him reacting in an emotional way, and to look at the facts, to look at the evidence, which is what Auguste Dupin always pushes for. So that was the beginning of the idea of mixing the two elements.
That's great, and as a fellow writer, I'm jealous. I can say what you do is what you did is, in a manner of speaking, is a great detective work for yourself, and seeing some suspicious elements in history, uncovering it in fiction is wow, great thing to do. Yes, congratulations for this is great.
Thank you. I like those suspicious elements. Yeah.
So let's delve into more Poe's life, because I think the connection here, his motivation, his fictional motivation, let's say, is connected to his own life, I guess. As I understand, he had a short and sad life. What can you tell about it? Is this why he is so determined to prove his grandparents are innocent, the letters are fake? Is that so? Is this motivation?
That's exactly right. Hitchcock, who was a big Edgar Allan Poe fan, mentioned part of the reason he really liked Poe was his sad life, and him creating such wonderful work from those elements. As I mentioned, Elizabeth Arnold, his grandmother, emigrated to Boston to be a performer on the Boston stage in 1796. And she took her daughter Eliza, who was Poe's mother, with her, who was also an actress. Poe, she was only 24 when she died of TB, and Poe wasn't even 3 years old yet. He had two siblings, and the whole family were split up. So his sister and his brother were sent to separate foster parents. Poe was taken in by Francis and the Allan family, which is his middle name. And it was happy initially because Francis adored him. But she died fairly young also, and he didn't get along with his foster father that well. They had spent time in London, as I said, when he was a child, and then they came back to America. When he was in university, he managed to get gambling debts and various other things that did not please his foster father. His foster father remarried, and when he died, Poe had been expecting an inheritance, and he got nothing. He was disinherited. So he was not pleased about that, because he thought he would have a comfortable life afterwards. And anyone that knows about Poe will remember that he was always struggling for money throughout his life. He did his best to work full-time as a writer, which is not easy. And also he worked as a magazine editor. But his dream was to live as a writer and to run his own literary magazine. To make matters worse, the love of his life, Virginia Poe, who was his cousin, she also contracted TB and died when she was 24. So there's a terrible pattern in his life, this death of a beautiful woman that he often writes about. When he spoke of his mother, the actress Eliza Poe, he made it clear how much he admired her. She was very, very talented. She was well thought of as an actress. So I felt that he would have been equally proud of his grandmother, who was also a very good actress, and that if he received these letters claiming that she and her husband were criminals, he just would not want to believe it. Plus the whole thing of being not even adopted properly, fostered by another family, and being told he was a reckless gambler by his foster father. He wouldn't like the insinuation that he came from bad blood, as it were. So that's why I took that position of him really wanting to prove the letters false. Very emotional stance. Also, when you look at his letters to friends and family, he is quite emotional. He's very intellectual, and he's a very good editor. He can be very rigorous in that way. But to me, in reading his letters, I really felt he wouldn't like the idea of coming from bad blood, as it were.
I see. I see. Okay. Well, it's quite enlightening. Right. What are let's talk about the structure and key themes of the book. I guess you set up a framework like this, and how did you what elements you used?
Okay, so I think I felt the audience, the reader, had to read the letters that he read. So we see Poe in action, but then we are presented with the letters that Elizabeth and Henry wrote to each other. And basically, without giving too much away, Elizabeth, her husband was a bit of a philanderer in my story. I don't know about real life. So she starts slashing women's dresses out of jealousy and a kind of revenge thing there. But for Henry, it becomes, the grandfather, it becomes a game. So they send letters back and forth to each other. And these letters, within them, I recount the real crimes that happened in a way. So I use all the places where the London monster actually struck, literally. So the location, the victim, all of that's within the letter. And I had to make up a backstory to go with it. So why Elizabeth knew the victim, why he knew the victim, what was going on. So it was the only way I could get that across. I didn't like the idea of two time frames in live action, because really letters are so important in that day. I wanted to play with that. If your family were in England and you were in America, you wouldn't hear from them for at least 6 weeks. It took that long to get news, or you may never hear from someone again. So the investigation is intercut with the letters between Henry and Elizabeth Arnold, and then Poe and Dupin start to receive further letters. So what they discovered during that time is someone is stalking them while they're in London. Who is it? So there's a second mystery. What do they want? It seems to be revenge, but they feel under threat. Is someone out to kill them, basically?
Oh, so tension. Great. So,
Hopefully tension, yes.
yeah, yeah, I'm sure. It's quite nice. Yeah. Okay. My question was, there are clues in your book about the origin stories of Edgar Allan Poe. You planned
Yes.
something for that? Yes. Tell me about it.
Yes. Okay. I liked the idea that readers who knew Poe's stories might have another little mystery of their own investigation to undertake when they read it. So you don't have to know about Poe to read the book, but if you do, you'll find little, what they call Easter eggs, hidden in the book. And the basic idea behind that, besides just a fun game, I hope, some readers have said they've enjoyed it, is that when Poe goes to London, all these things happen to him and they inspire some of his stories. So without giving too much away, there is an orangutan reference. There is, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of the other things. Oh, a ballooning reference. So there's quite a few different story elements for stories that were written after 1840 that I've sort of hidden within the novel. And it's just for fun, really. But, again, it raises the question, what inspires an author? Where does someone get his ideas? And Poe did get quite a few ideas from true stories, from the newspaper, from things that were current in his day. So it's just playing with that notion again.
Okay. I have a question from the audience. Um, while writing, uh, have you ever felt fiction solving case? Have you that solving?
I
When writing?
Uh-oh, you're frozen again.
Yeah.
I didn't hear that question. So something about when I'm writing, but I didn't hear the rest.
Okay. Yes, but I don't know. I
Can you hear me?
uh, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I'm hearing you a little.
I can hear you. Yes,
Yeah,
I'm
I'm not
okay. But problem ne acaba ya?
hearing you a little.
Yes, I'm. Oh,
I'm hearing your voice.
okay. Uh, you can hear you
Okay.
now.
No, I think we're frozen again. Sure, it's a good question. Can't hear it though. Ah, you're moving. You're moving.
All right. Uh, No. Okay. I'm
Are you
trying.
moved? Okay.
Yeah, I moved, but okay. Can you
Okay.
hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
All right. Great.
Sorry.
Hopefully it
You're
goes like
back.
that. I'm sorry. I guess my connection is bad. All right. The question was from the audience, and they were asking,
Okay.
have you ever feel while writing your book that you are not writing fiction, but solving a mystery, or a real life mystery?
Ah.
Uh,
Ah, that's a little fantasy of mine. It would be incredible to find out that they really did do it. It's a great question. I think when you make little, elements, when you piece together little elements from fact and fiction, there is this sneaking desire to find out that you got it right, that it really did happen. I'm sure it didn't, but it'd be nice if it did. So, excellent question. Mm.
yes. Yeah, similar thing happened to me while writing my last novel, not published yet, and I was talking with the it's also based on a real life event, real crime
Okay.
uh, from 80s, and I was talking with the detective who solved it, and while we are speaking, I I solved a very little thing, some
Yeah.
not a great mystery, but I found something that he didn't know at the time, and it was accelerating, uh,
Yes.
a very little piece of the puzzle he didn't see. I found that while writing, while talking with him.
Yeah.
It was very nice. I understand what you say. Okay,
Yeah. That'd be fantastic.
so as I said, I wrote a novel about historical crime, albeit is pretty recent. But yours,
Hmm.
but I did a lot of research. I checked many things, but to my advantage, many things from that time is still available in the internet. At least I can
Yes.
find the videos from 80s, to just to know the looks, the feel. But what you did is from a long distance, from long past. So how extensive was your research? Was it hard? And also, was it difficult to blend reality with fiction? Are there any pitfalls to avoid in such work? I'm asking this for writers.
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I was quite new to historical fiction and crime, I over researched, I'm sure. You read more experienced historical novelists, for example, um, they kind of learn what you can avoid researching and what you absolutely have to research. I mean, as you say, being able to go back and watch videos to get a sense of what people wore, how they acted, dialogue. I would. That's a great idea to watch 1980s videos, because I find if you watch some contemporary stories that are set in the 80s, often there's little dialogue glitches that really annoy me as a viewer when they say something very modern in the language that
yes.
absolutely wasn't said back then. So, with dialogue, you have to balance it a bit. You don't want to completely mimic a 19th century dialogue, or I didn't want to. But there's so much to research, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But I could spend days doing it, and I was like, really, I have to be doing some writing. This is, what did they eat? I did have to research what they wore, because you're describing the dresses that are being cut. So the fashion was actually important. And then little things, I was living in London when I was writing the book still, so I could go and visit the places, but then you find street names have changed. So, London's an old city, but obviously new buildings have arrived in that time since even 1840 and then again 1788. So I was looking at maps all the time, looking at street names. I spent a lot of time. That's why I read the initial book I mentioned, Old Times, because I wanted to read reports from that time rather than just modern accounts. Old newspapers. You can go to the Old Bailey site and you can read the transcripts of the trials. You can actually go and read the transcripts of the London Monster trials. So of course I did all that, but it's endless. You can just keep researching forever, and you really have to find a balance. And I'm still learning that. I think it's tricky. It's fun, but it's tricky.
Yeah. As you say, you can over search or overthink.
Yeah.
I guess for my side, I tried to, in the 80s, I was a teenager or young man, as I can say. I was in college, so I tried to remember that times thinking, the mentality of the times. And when I try to write like that, I realized how much it changed in 30 years. And I guess it was much more difficult to find the tone, the thinking of 18th and 19th century. How did you do? I mean, because I had the reference myself and my friends and at times I remembered those days, but you have no chance like that. And still there's still the danger to, as you mentioned, to sound modern or very unnaturally old. So
yes, you have to balance it for the reader, I think. And what I did was, there's a website that has a lot of Poe's letters, his personal letters scanned. So I read those because I felt that was the best way to get a sense of his voice. And then I read his stories again as well. But if you've read Poe's stories, I first read his stories when I was about 9 or 10 years old. And when I reread them, I was shocked because the vocabulary is incredible. It's not an easy read. So I didn't want to copy his style in the stories directly because they're not an easy read, and to have a whole novel like that would be difficult. His letters are much more accessible, and that's a great resource. It really, to me, made it much better. And then I read lots of biographies as well, just to get context. But it's tricky because the problem with writing a well-beloved real person is everyone will have their own view of what he was like and what he sounded like. So you just have to write it the way you want to and follow your heart and, in developing the character. But I did use the letters, and to me, it's fairly close. And a lot of reviewers thought it was empathetic. The important thing for me was to make him an empathetic character, even if he's a little desperate to prove his grandparents aren't criminals.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Great. And then another question from the audience. When you choose a real life person as as your hero, is it better to know much about his real life, or would it be better if you don't know much? What would be the if you were given a choice, what would you prefer? To know him
For
better or
me,
not?
for me, I would have to know him better. I would not find it possible to write him without knowing as much as I could. I think the danger of that is, and it's certainly something I ran into, um, you read what other people think after a while, and then you can get quite worried. So I think I wanted to get the facts as right as possible, but then obviously my story didn't happen. So I tried to choose, for example, a time in 1840 when Poe wasn't doing a lot in the biographies I read. So technically, maybe he could have gone away. I mean, obviously, he was doing something, but just to give
Mhm.
it that possibility, you know. Um, but I think the problem with Poe in particular is many people know this. Rufus Griswold, who wrote his obituary, wrote a very nasty obituary about him and set about after Poe died damaging his reputation. So a lot of the misconceptions people have about Poe came from this man who did his utmost out of revenge to destroy his character, saying he was a drunk, nobody liked him, he was a terrible person, he was impossible to work with, all sorts of things like that. So and what makes that even worse is he'd managed to get control of the rights of Poe's work, all of his literature, from Poe's mother-in-law. So not only was he controlling Poe's work, by rights, he was setting out to damage his reputation. And a lot of things stuck for years. It's the additional research people have done that have cleared his name a bit, but um, things cling on. It was quite a malicious thing to do. So that was another reason for really trying to read quite a few biographies and read his own letters to get a sense of him. Yeah.
Yeah. And those who, I don't know, how can I say, it's a big responsibility, I guess, writing about a real life person. I mean,
Mm.
well, I remember, an episode of Star Trek, which where they were using Abraham Lincoln in this episode. And
Yeah.
well, you can do this in fiction, but you have to stick some facts to some facts, and you have to bear the responsibility, I guess. So I understand this is a very unnerving thing to do. Yeah,
Mm. Mm.
I felt that when I wrote about uh, my hero also is a real life person or based in a real life person. So I understand
Mm.
it's
Mm.
difficult. Okay, Karen, let's let's delve in some cliches, uh, like why crime and mystery, why detective novels. What do you like detective novels? Do you have favorite authors or movies, or how do you come into this genre?
Good question. As when I started writing as a child, I wrote either comedy or crime, mystery or comedy, one extreme to the other. So, in my dream world, if I could be aspire to the heights of Billy Wilder, I would, because I love the way he did noir. I love film noir, particularly, but also he did marvelous comedy. Um, you can mix the two. You can have humor in detective work. I do a little bit in this, I think, with Elizabeth's letters, but it's not a funny crime book. But I like funny crime books. I tend to like literary. I don't know what literary crime is. I like James Lee Burke, for example, very much. Um, American author, and his I like his characters, quite complicated main characters. Um, there's many that I like. I recently read a Lou Berney novel that I loved. And I always forget the title, the long ago and something. It's for some reason the title doesn't stick in my head, but I really loved that crime novel. It won loads of awards, and he managed to deal with different points of view and complicated two strands of mysteries together. But for me, it was a mix of emotion that worked very well, and then trying to make sense of a crime that happened in the past. So, yeah, totally enjoyed that. On television, I like police procedurals. It's not something I feel I could write because I think you really have to know everything about that world, or I would feel I would have to. So it's something I enjoy watching, but I wouldn't try a straight up police procedural, probably. You know, I really enjoyed writing the screenwriting book about crime, the different, having to analyze for myself the different subgenres, you know, so what are the normal tropes like in a police procedural, what are they in a detective story, what are they in a gangster film, a serial killer story, and then how might a writer play with those or subvert them, because I think writers know the conventions but always want to do something a little different, which probably makes it a better book. So, did I cover everything?
Yeah, great. Okay, I also think, I liked it because about what you say, because I also think I'm also in a place between humor and thriller, and I strongly believe any good story must include humor that needs a relief,
Yes.
some laughter or some smiles. It must raise some smiles, and well, I write that way, or at least I try to write that way. So, and since it's a trilogy, um, since it's the first book of a trilogy, let's tell us about the other two books, please. Is still I understand it's still with Poe and Dupin goes together again, again and
Yes.
again. Okay.
Yeah. So, what happens is some story strands I set up in book one in London Monster are developed in the next two books. So, what happens in London Monster? Dupin is there to help Poe, but then we find he has his own family mystery to solve. So, I had a lot of fun developing Dupin's character further, because in Poe's stories, you only meet him in the three short stories. And you know a little bit about him, but not that much. So I think this goes back to one of the earlier questions. I could experiment with him much more. So I tried to keep his character in keeping, but I had to make up his backstory, who his family were. You know, we know his address from the Poe stories, but why is he impoverished in the stories? Why does he have no money? He's sort of aristocratic, that's suggested. So I developed all that, and in London Monster, you learn a little bit about his nemesis, the one that brought his own family to ruin in Paris. In book two, Jewel of Peru, a woman called Helena Lodiges arrives in Philadelphia and wants Poe to solve a mystery for her because she thinks she's read about him and she thinks he's the great detective, not Dupin. So her fiance, the man she's in love with, basically has died in the port in Philadelphia, but she believes it's murder, and she wants Poe to find out. So he contacts Dupin, and Dupin comes to Philadelphia to investigate. Helena Lodiges is mentioned in book one. She's Poe's benefactress. So as Poe was always impoverished, I needed to find a way that someone that never had any money could take a trip to London and stay in a fancy hotel and the whole thing. So he edited a book for Helena, an ornithology book, which is playing with the idea of the conchologist's book. It's a book he edited, I can't pronounce it, about shells, basically. So I referenced that and said she gave him a lot of money to edit her book about birds. So that's how he knows her. She is a real character, but not much is known about her. She lived in Hackney, and there used to be a very large greenhouse in Hackney that Poe could have visited as a child. It was very near where he went to school. and it was a big tourist attraction in London. So again, real person, they could have met, possible, the time frame fits, but it's a made up mystery, and she's a taxidermist. And so basically, Poe and Dupin are trying to work out, was this man murdered or not? And it's set during the nativist riots of 1844 in Philly, where the Irish Catholic immigrants were given a hard time and churches were burned down and all sorts of things. So that's the backdrop. And Poe left Philadelphia just before the biggest riots happened. So, I wondered what he thought of being in Philadelphia during that time, which was very violent, basically. The third book, Edgar Allan Poe and the Empire of the Dead, is set in Paris, and that is focusing much more on Dupin's nemesis, so the man that brought the Dupin family to ruin. This is the final showdown between Dupin and his nemesis, and Poe is trying to help him. And now Poe takes the role of becoming much more analytical, because Dupin is very emotional about it all, because his life was destroyed by this man. So, of course, we have catacombs. You have to have the catacombs and the streets of Paris, and researching what Paris was like in 1849. And it's bookended in Baltimore during Poe's last days before he died, sadly, at age 40 in Baltimore.
Yeah, wonderful. Wow. Great. Okay, Karen, one more question from the audience. Do you have any favorite story by Edgar Allan Poe?
Yeah. My favorites are still probably the favorites I had as a child. I like the Dupin stories very much. I think they're great. But I really like the Cask of Amontillado and the Telltale Heart, because they're crime stories. And they're told from the murderer's point of view. I don't think of them as horror as much as crime. And, we know when people started making gangster films, it's from the point of view of the bad guy. So I liked that he did that so early on, rather than the hero, going out and investigating. He's telling it from the bad guy's point of view. So I think, those are favorites. And the tension he builds up, getting inside the head of the killer, I still enjoy those very much. So those are two of my favorites.
So, do you believe it's important to get in the head of the bad guy? Or what do you prefer? Is it important?
I think so. I mean, for me it is. Certainly Poe talked about that, I think. Something I learned in screenwriting was, when you're writing a screenplay and you have different characters, everyone focuses on the main character. They try to get inside their head, develop them. But a little line to remember is, everyone in a movie thinks they're the main character. It's not just your hero. Everyone else thinks they are. It's their story too. And if you want to write realistic characters, think that way. So they're not just cardboard cutout characters that are at the mercy of the plot. You want them more developed. And then they're a tougher villain to vanquish, if they're more realistic. So I would want to get inside their head for sure. I know what their motivation is, and I did my best to do that.
Yeah. Okay. This is also a great way to look at life, I guess. For empathy, at least.
Yes.
To everybody's is the first character in his own life, but there are other characters, right? Okay. Great. Karen, our time seems up. It was very nice to meet you and talk with you, and thank you very much for talking with me, talking with us.
Thank you.
It was great, and I hope your other books also published in Turkish language, so everyone can read. And well, that's all for today.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for such a lovely conversation and such great audience questions. I really appreciate it, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a delight. It's always nice to talk to another writer, and I'm looking forward to reading your books. Certainly have the Istanbul Noir, so I'll read that.
Yeah. I had a short story there.
One
Yes.
story in that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So
hope you like
I
it.
hope I'll get to read them in English. My Turkish isn't good enough to do that.
Well, I hope one day. It's not easy to publish in overseas for, lesser known countries writers like from eastern parts or of the cultural world. So I hope one day. Also, I hope one day to have you here in Istanbul. Maybe next year. Maybe in the future.
Great.
So for as a guest again in Black Week. Okay. Until then, let's say bye.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very
çok
much.
teşekkürler.
It's been a delight.
Yes. Sure is. Okay. Çok teşekkürler herkese. Hoşça kalın. Tekrar görüşmek üzere. Bye Karen. Bye everybody.
Bye.